a dinner table set to perfection, except for what vanished. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Comment where you're listening from. I always love reading your stories. Your voices bring these mysteries alive. Let's begin. When you live in Nero Wolfe's brownstone, you learn fast that disturbances come in 3 flavors. The kind that make Wolfe snort once and return to his orchids, the kind that make him raise an eyebrow, and the kind that make him sigh before conceding to human folly. On this particular Tuesday, I wasn't sure yet which variety we had on our hands, but it arrived on the form of Mrs. Lydia Vardis, a slim, composed woman with the sort of hat you'd expect to find at a museum gala, not our front steps. Fritz had ushered her in with his customary polite efficiency, and Wolfe, true to form, hadn't budged an inch from his oversized chair. I was perched at my desk with my notebook open, because any woman who rang our bell at 11 in the morning on a weekday was either selling religion or trouble, and neither was the sort of thing you left unrecorded. Mrs. Vardis introduced herself in a voice that was calm, a little too calm, like someone who had practiced in the mirror. Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. My matter is delicate. She removed her gloves, finger by finger, the way you'd expect from a woman used to being watched. Wolfe gave her a fractional nod, which was as good as a mayoral handshake in his language. Your matter, madam, is delicate. So you say. Sit. She sat, spine straight, eyes on him, as if I were the wallpaper. Some women notice me. Some don't. Mrs. Vardis fell squarely in the latter camp. It concerns an object that has disappeared from my home, she said. An heirloom, a knife rest. If you don't know what a knife rest is, you're in good company. Wolfe knew, of course. He knows the Latin name for parsley and probably what Caesar had for breakfast the morning of the Rubicon. I, on the other hand, had to squint. A what? I asked. She turned to me for the first time, lips curving as if indulging a child. A small object, Mr. Goodwin. Silver, usually. It keeps a carving knife from staining the tablecloth. Ours has been in the Vardis family for nearly a century. Hand-forged, and now, inexplicably, gone. I jotted that down with a flourish. A missing knife holder. That's it. Knife rest, Wolfe corrected, eyes closed. A functional trifle in most homes, in some an emblem. Go on, madam. Mrs. Vardis's composure cracked just enough for me to glimpse the nerves behind it. It was kept in a display cabinet. The lock was intact, no sign of entry, but yesterday when I went to polish it, it was gone. I fear it is not simply misplaced. Fear? Wolfe asked, still not opening his eyes. Yes, she said. Because my family has quarreled over that knife rest before. Its ownership carries implications that raised my eyebrows. You're saying someone in your family swiped it on purpose? Over a hunk of silver? Her gaze sharpened. Not a hunk of silver. A symbol of inheritance. Whoever holds the knife rest controls certain trusts. My husband believed it trivial. I do not. That got Wolfe to open his eyes. Just slightly, but enough for me to note it. Symbols of inheritance. That meant money. And where money squats, motive always curls up beside it. Wolfe let the silence stretch. Mrs. Vardis sat poised, but her fingers tugged at her glove. Finally, Wolfe spoke. I do not fetch objects. A constable will suffice for such labor. Her chin lifted. I don't ask you to fetch, Mr. Wolfe. I ask you to know, to see through them. My family will lie, obfuscate, and flatter. You, she faltered, then pressed on, you will not. That was when I knew Wolfe would take it. He hadn't said yes yet, but I could tell. There was something about her phrasing, about the pride in assuming he would cut through her family's nonsense, that tickled the part of Wolfe that lives for intellectual battle. Me? I wasn't so sure. A missing knife rest wasn't exactly murder in the park. But when Wolfe stirred his lips into the faintest of smiles, I marked it down in my head. We were in for it. Fritz brought the beer as if it were a formal witness, on a tray with a napkin folded into a triangle so sharp you could have shaved with it. Wolfe ignored the glass at first and looked at Mrs. Vardis as if she were a botanical specimen he'd seen in a plate, but never expected to meet in person. I had the notebook ready and the phone within reach because when a woman tells you a knife rest can move a trust, there will be follow-ups, lawyers, and people who think volume can substitute for virtue. You will define the field, Wolfe said, easing a breath that passed for assent. Names, relations, interests, the object's provenance and the precise condition of its confinement before it vanished. That was all said without the slightest tremor, but I could have sworn he'd warmed by half a degree. Symbols excite him the way a new pastry recipe excites Fritz. Mrs. Vardis met him without flinching. The knife rest was forged in 1929 by a Greek silversmith who worked for my husband's grandfather on the island of Chios. The family always used it at holiday dinners. 2 years ago, my mother-in-law, Sophia, added a clause to her will that whoever possessed it at the time of her death would administer the family trusts for 5 years. She believed in tokens. She died last month. She said it without a wobble, which told me grief had either been filed or sold at a discount to practicality. The rest was kept in a locked cabinet in our dining room. Only 3 keys exist. Mine, my husband's, and a spare in the secretary in his study. The cabinet was undisturbed. "You inspected the lock?" Wolfe said. "Visually," she said. There were no marks. Ruby polish streaks on the wood around the keyhole. Smudges of graphite. Abrasion. That got me a look. "We did not dust it, Mr. Goodwin. We were trying not to turn our home into a crime scene. Yet." "Unfortunate," Wolfe murmured. "When did you last see the object?" "A week ago, Friday. We hosted a small dinner to mark a charitable gift. The rest was on display." "And you discovered its absence?" "Yesterday morning." "Between those points," Wolfe said. "What visitors?" She started counting on memory and fingers, always a risky combination in front of Wolfe, but she did respectably. "Family came and went. My husband's son, Julian. My sister-in-law, Calliope Demos. Our attorney, Mr. Kells. My husband's business partner, Ms. Rule. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Ahern, of course. And my niece, Eleni, who's staying with us while she auditions for graduate programs." Wolfe opened his eyes wider. "You maintain a menagerie." "I maintain a family," she said coolly. "The boundary is porous." I liked her for that line more than I should have. It was accurate and didn't ask for applause. "Each had access?" Wolfe asked. "To the public rooms, yes. To the cabinet. Not unless they stole a key or picked a lock." "Huh." Wolfe shifted his bulk and lifted the glass. "Picking a lock on a cabinet is a primitive art learned by half the burglars in prison and 90% of adolescent boys. Mr. Goodwin." He didn't have to finish. I got up, called my taxi company Reflex, and didn't get that far. "You're not going anywhere," he said with that patience that makes you feel you've interrupted a chess move he made 3 minutes ago. "The disturbance will come to us." He turned to Mrs. Vardis. "You will summon your circle here at 6 o'clock this evening. All of them, your husband as well." She hesitated. "Athan will not like that." "He may dislike what he likes," Wolfe said, "so long as he attends. You will also bring the cabinet key that was used most recently, the spare from the secretary, and any correspondence relating to the clause. Your retainer is $3,000, against which I will bill my time and the time of my assistants, cash or certified check." If the amount startled her, she didn't share it with her face. She nodded, took out a checkbook that looked as if it had never seen a grocery store, and wrote. When she rose, the calm had a hairline crack. "If I bring them, Mr. Wolfe, you won't humiliate my family." "Madam," he said, "you already have, by requiring us." She considered that, inclined her head, and left with the quiet of a woman who had never learned to slam doors. When the latch clicked, I let the grin out. "You're hosting a dinner party for a missing cutlery pillow. Fritz will need to iron the napkins." "Pooh. You will restrain your vocabulary. The symbol is the knot. Whoever maneuvered, it is prepared to maneuver more. The brown stone remains inviolate in form, if not in practice. Meaning, they will come. They will press the air from the walls. You will watch." So I watched, starting with the telephone. I got Kells's office and told a woman with a voice like a stapler that Mr. Wolfe required Mr. Kells at 6 sharp with documentation and of any trust revisions involving the late Mrs. Sophia Vardis. She said Mr. Kells was very busy, and I said Mr. Wolfe was very immovable, and she caved in the professionally correct number of seconds. I called the Vardis residence next. A man answered in a tone that said he had never personally dialed a phone. It turned out to be Athan himself. "This is outrageous," he said after I had given my spiel. "My father's mother loved theatrics. We don't have to indulge them from beyond the grave." "You can indulge Mr. Wolfe or the police," I said. "You pick the flavor. 6 o'clock." He made a sound like a crushed paper bag and said he would come. By 1, the orchids had their daily rites, and Wolfe came down in a better temper. He did justice to Fritz's veal, and I did justice to hearing about it. Our afternoon was uneventful except for the small matter of preparing the office as if it were a theater. I adjusted the red leather chairs into the semicircle that makes a man feel exposed without knowing why, checked the dictaphone, sharpened pencils, and removed one small porcelain paperweight from the edge of Wolfe's desk because the last time a client reached for something to squeeze, he had chosen it. Wolfe watched me reduce our hazards with the benign disinterest of a man observing a tide. "You suppose," he said as I pocketed the paperweight, "that the culprit is a male." "I didn't say that." "You implied it by removing the toy. Men fidget more destructively." "Women fidget more silently," I said. "If you're wrong, that paperweight becomes evidence." He sniffed. "You disturb me, Archie. You create possibilities where there are none." "That's my job," I said, and the bell rang to begin the shift from quiet to crowd. At a minute before 6, we got the first wave. A tall woman with a haircut that dared you to complain and a portfolio clamped under her arm like a New Testament. "Maxine Rule," she said, giving me a quick scan that came back stamped with toleration. Athan told me we were being treated to a performance. "We do matinees on Thursdays," I said, and showed her in. She took one look at Wolfe and rearranged her face into something that wouldn't get her billed. "You prefer facts to charm," she said. "We'll get along." "We shall see," Wolfe said. The next arrival was Victor Kells, dried to legal perfection, tie slightly darker than his suit, eyes polished to a professional empathy that made you want to count the silver in your own pockets. He handed me a folder as if it were a hot infant. "The clause," he said, "and copies of trust schedules. This is quite irregular." "Yes," I said, "and the sky's blue." "Keep walking." After him came a young woman with dark hair that didn't quite obey orders, and a coat someone else had paid for. "Eleni," she said, bright and breathless, the kind of breathless that is learned, not born. "I'm only here because Aunt Lydia insisted." I put her where I could see her, which is a habit not limited to nieces. Calliope Demos arrived next, hat at an angle that fought tradition to a draw, smelling faintly of something floral and expensive. She kissed the air twice near my cheek and called me dear, with a Greek lilt that had never been to Greece but had read about it. "Sophia was a saint," she announced to the room, "and we will honor her wishes." Wolfe lifted a brow at the canonization. Then Julian came. Late, of course, with a sport coat that had been cheated on by a tape measure and the kind of jaw you get from clenching at other people's schedules. He looked around as if the furniture had made a personal remark. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Over a spoon prop?" "Knife rest," 3 voices corrected on different notes, Lydia's cool alto as she entered, Kells's tenor because documents must be accurate, and mine because I respect a detail once it is paying our rent. The last to appear was a Tharn, grey at the temples and used to rooms parting for him, which this room did not. He took one step into Wolfe's office and stopped because Wolfe didn't stand. People forget they can be greeted by a refusal to move. Lydia came behind him with a small velvet pouch and 2 keys on separate rings. She handed them to me with clean fingers. "The one with the blue thread is mine," she said quietly. "The brass key is a Tharn's. The spare was in the secretary, as always. We brought the lot." "Good," I said, and put them in an envelope that wasn't going to leave my person. When everyone had a chair and a posture, Wolfe allowed the silence to gather and develop edges. I've seen him do it often. It's always the same recipe. Half disdain, half curiosity, stirred by the sense that he already knows more than he should and might say so. He took a sip of beer, put the glass down in a place I'd cleared for it, and addressed the air. "A family emblem has migrated," he said. "If it migrated by mischance, we could end this now with an apology and a mild scolding. Since you have consented to gather, you have chosen that it did not." That earned him no words, which was an achievement. He continued, "I require your accounts of the last week in which the object was present. I will also require your attitudes toward the clause that the matriarch inserted. Do not preen. You are all, I am sure, fond of virtue. But symbols such as this are tinder. They combust even in the best hands." His gaze went to Rule. "Ms. Rule, begin." She didn't blink. "I was at dinner. I ran numbers while a Tharn tried to charm a museum donor. I left at 10:30. I don't care who administers the trusts so long as they sign where I tell them to." "An admirably frank parasitism," Wolfe said. "Mr. Kells." Kells colored by one shade you couldn't prove in court. "The clause is unorthodox but valid. It was Mrs. Vardis's wish to prevent squabbling by identifying a single administrator by a physical token. She believed that possession would be obvious and difficult to fake. She underrated you," Wolfe said, which got a ripple I filed away. It had curled from the direction of Julian. Lydia sat perfectly still. "Julian," Wolfe said, "your view." "I think it's nonsense. Grandmother loved myths. If the law wants to tie control to a dinner trinket, the law's stupider than I thought. That's a rich attitude for a man who wants to open a restaurant with trust backing," Eleni said, in the tone of someone who's paid attention when it hurts someone else. Julian's head snapped. "Mind your business." "It is her business," Calliope murmured. "It is all our business now." Wolfe watched the small sparks with the patience of a man waiting for a souffle. He let them settle. "Mr. Vardis," he said finally to a Tharn, "you considered the token trivial." "I still do," a Tharn said. "My mother's whims should not govern our investments." "But they do," Wolfe said. "That is the inconvenience of wills." He leaned back. "Very well. We will proceed in order, and you will recount your movements. In the interim, Mr. Goodwin will inspect the keys in the pouch. While you talk, consider this. If the cabinet was undisturbed, then either a key was used with the owner's knowledge or the lock accepted an impostor." He closed his eyes, and it looked like rest, but it wasn't. I stood, felt 7 kinds of attention brush my jacket as I slipped the envelope from my pocket, and thought, not for the first time, that the brownstone wasn't made for crowds, but it was built for pressure. The air had thickened by a degree, the way it does just before lightning finds a preference. Wolfe had invited the storm in, and it was going to rain exactly where he wanted. I took the envelope to my desk and pulled the keys out one by one like I was laying cards. Lydia's was neat, a little thread looped through the top to mark it. Orthan's was heavier, brass and scuffed, the kind of wear you get from decades of pockets and drawers. The so-called spare was thinner, cheap metal, and looked like it hadn't been touched since the Eisenhower administration. I held them so the light hit cleanly, partly for my own look and partly because I knew the room was watching. If you want to make suspects squirm, you don't need a gun. You just need to handle something they might have touched. Wolfe didn't open his eyes, but his fingers moved on the chair arm as if he were sorting through categories only he could see. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Yeah. Smell them." That's Wolfe. Asked me to sniff a key as if it were a Bordeaux. I obliged. Lydia's had the faint tang of polish, lemony, with maybe a whiff of something floral that probably came from her gloves. Ethan's smelled like metal should, faintly sour. The spare had nothing. "No surprises," I said. "Keep them secure," Wolfe murmured. I tucked them back, and Wolfe let the silence cook for another 10 seconds before swinging it toward Calliope. She had been sitting back in her chair like a queen on loan, but when Wolfe turned his face to her, she leaned forward. "I saw it last," she said, as if daring anyone to challenge. "At dinner. It was there, beneath the glass. Sophia would have smiled to know it was used, even in pretense." "You inspected it?" Wolfe asked. "I admired it," she corrected. "A family emblem, yes, but also beautiful. The silver was dark in the grooves from age. It should not have been polished. It should have remained authentic." "That is aesthetic," Wolfe said, "not evidentiary." "After dinner?" "I left," she said with a shrug. "By 11. My chauffeur can testify." Julian gave a short laugh. "And you think we believe you didn't linger to admire it again?" "Jealousy does not suit you," she said smoothly, though her knuckles tightened on the chair arms. Wolfe didn't press. He was letting them do the pressing for him. That's a habit of his. Give them a thin line and watch them hang ornaments on it. He turned his head an inch. "Eleni." The niece straightened, nervous and eager at once. "I didn't touch it. I wouldn't. I thought the whole thing ridiculous. Aunt Lydia is the only one who respects traditions. The rest of us just fight." "That is assertion, not detail," Wolfe said. She flushed. "I was in the dining room after dinner. I went back for my purse. The cabinet was locked then. I looked, because the light caught it. That's all." Her honesty was clumsy enough to make it sound real. Still, I wrote it down with a question mark. "Julian," Wolfe said. Julian crossed his legs like he was bracing. "I never touched it. Why would I? I don't need a trinket to run a business." "You need funds," Eleni said quietly. He shot her a glare that could have carved stone. "Mind yourself." "Enough," Wolfe said, not raising his voice but flattening the air with it. He let the weight settle before redirecting. Mr. Vardis Athen sat back, folding his hands as if to show he had nothing to hide. "I didn't care about it. Still don't. My mother's clause was absurd. If one of these vultures wanted it, let them take it. I wouldn't fight over it." "Yet you kept a key," Wolfe said, "because it was in my desk. Habit, not reverence." I could see Wolfe considering the texture of that word, habit, the way he would weigh whether a spice was authentic. Then his eyes shifted to Lydia. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands were folded too tightly in her lap. "I checked it the day before yesterday. It was there, yesterday, gone. I haven't accused anyone. I only want it found." "Madam," Wolfe said, "your restraint is admirable, but you have accused everyone by summoning us." That silenced her, though her eyes did not flicker. Wolfe took a deep drink of beer, set the glass down, and shut his eyes. That was the signal. I stood, moved to the window for no reason but to catch a breath of air, and watched the lot of them shift in their seats. When Wolfe goes quiet, they can't help filling the silence with their own guilt, fears, and bravado. It's a trick older than scripture, but it still works. Rule broke first. Let's not play parlor games. Whoever took it wanted leverage. That's obvious. You bring us here, and all we'll do is accuse each other until someone shouts. If you want the truth, look at motive. Who needs control of the trust the most? Her eyes cut straight to Julian. He leaned forward, hands flat. I'm building something legitimate. A restaurant, yes, but not a toy. Grandmother promised support. If she wanted to tie it to that silly knife rest, fine, but I don't need to steal it. I could have asked. Aunt Lydia knows. Lydia didn't blink. You could have asked. You did not. That landed like a pebble in a still pond, ripples touching everyone. Wolfe opened his eyes. Enough. He reached for the bell pull and tugged. Fritz appeared, efficient and silent. Bring coffee, Wolfe said, for all. When Fritz had gone, Wolfe folded his hands across his stomach. You each maintain innocence, that is expected, but a symbol cannot vanish unaided. It migrated by design. I will discover who moved it, why and when. Until then, you may wait. That wasn't dismissal, but it came close. Rule set her jaw. Kells cleared his throat. Calliope adjusted her gloves. The others fidgeted in their own ways. I knew Wolfe. He had heard something, a turn of phrase or a sliver of timing that had locked into place in his head. He wouldn't tip his hand yet. Instead, he let them sit with the pressure, sipping his coffee when Fritz returned and offering nothing more. By 8 o'clock, he let them go. Lydia gathered her niece like a shield. Julian stormed out. Calliope kissed the air again, and Athan muttered about farces. Rule was the last, cool and collected, but I caught her looking once at Lydia's purse as if she wanted to weigh it. When the door shut, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes again. Archie. Yeah. Saul Panzer. That was the marker. Wolfe didn't summon Saul unless the game had crossed from parlor to field. I called Saul, gave him the quick rundown, and he said he'd be over in the morning. If there was a lock to check, a trail to follow, or a liar to shadow, Saul was the bloodhound you wanted. When I hung up, I looked at Wolfe. You've got something. He didn't open his eyes. Someone betrayed themselves. The object is not the only thing that moved. Watch them, Archie. Words are heavier than silver. I cleaned up, locked the envelope with the keys in my desk drawer, and left Wolfe to his thoughts and Fritz to his kitchen. The brownstone quieted, but it wasn't peace. The air still carried the residue of that family's fractures. You don't wash that out with coffee. Later, while I was on the phone to arrange a cab for the morning's errands, Wolfe called out from the office without opening his eyes. They will return, Archie, and when they do, the missing knife rest will not be the only absence. I didn't know yet what he meant, but I wrote it down, because with Wolfe, even the throwaways have a habit of turning into traps. Saul showed at 9/8 with a clean shave and a face that didn't admit to weather. Fritz had the eggs soft and the coffee firm. Wolfe gave Saul the overview between forkfuls, not because he likes to share over breakfast, but because he likes to see useful men eat properly in his house. When Saul was squared away, Wolfe issued assignments the way a general might pass out hills. Mr. Panzer, acquaint yourself with Mr. Julian Vardis's movements between Friday and Monday. Confirm his avowed enterprise and any shortfalls requiring improvisation. Also, Miss Rule, her office, her associations, and her manner of counting. Mr. Goodwin, you will examine the premises from which the object migrated and speak to the domestic. I will remain where I am least obstructive. He dipped his toast as if it were a seal on the orders. Saul took a thin notebook from his pocket and wrote nothing, which for Saul is as good as engraving. He asked for copies of the keys so he could check a cylinder if necessary. I told him the keys weren't leaving the brownstone, and his left eyebrow gave me professional regret. I'll make do, he said, and vanished on shoe leather. Wolfe looked at me. You will be as unobtrusive as a trombone, he said. Nevertheless, try. I promised to play pianissimo and phoned Lydia. She answered herself, voice tight, and said Mrs. Ahern would be in and the cabinet would be waiting for my inspection, as if it were a patient on a gurney. I grabbed my hat, locked my drawer with the envelope inside, told Fritz not to let anyone into the office who didn't improve the furniture, and headed east. The Vardis residence was a limestone townhouse that had married old money and never sought a divorce. A man in a dark coat opened the door with a level of reluctance that said he was paid by the ounce to distribute welcome. He patched me through a hall of rugs that had outlived small nations and delivered me to Mrs. Ahern in the dining room. She was the sort of housekeeper who considered dust a personal insult. I could have shaved in the shine on the mahogany. She looked me over and decided I was not a mop, but might, with training, learn to be one. "The cabinet's there," she said, chin at a display case in the corner. It was handsome and practical, the kind of thing that says, "We kept the silver," without shouting. I let her watch me look. The lock was a simple, warded affair, installed by someone who had believed in show over security. The glass was clean, too clean. Even glass keeps a memory of fingers if you know where to squint. This one had been wiped like a conscience. I crouched, checked the plinth, and saw what I wanted. A faint half-moon where something had sat for years, interrupted by a cleaner oval where it hadn't sat lately. The outline matched the length and curve of a knife rest if you happen to have been living with one in your head since yesterday. "When do you polish?" I asked. "Every Thursday," she said. "And after dinners if guests insist on breathing." "Did you polish after the charity dinner?" "Friday." I did not. I set the room to rights and left it till Saturday morning. Mrs. Vardis told me not to touch the cabinet until Monday. She was sentimental. "And you didn't touch it Monday either," I said. Her lips thinned. "Sir, I do not need to be told twice." "Who dusted the glass then?" I tapped it lightly. She caught herself before saying, "No one." "I did not. Nor the maid. Mrs. Vardis sometimes. She hates smudges." "Smart woman," I said. "Keys?" She gestured toward the doorway. "In the study, Mr. Vardis keeps his. The spare is in the secretary there. Mrs. Vardis has hers in her purse always." She folded her hands. "Only family and invited guests use the powder room off this hall. No one should have been in the study." "Should is a church word," I said, and headed for the study. The study had the kind of desk that makes pens feel skinny. The secretary sat against the wall with an air of innocence that would have been more convincing without the nick near the lock plate. I bent, sniffed, and got lemon oil and a memory of graphite. Lydia's key had carried polish. Somebody had believed in lubrication. I opened the secretary with the permission of a woman who didn't want my hands on it, but wanted the truth more. The top drawer slid smooth as virtue and showed me a velvet tray with the little indentation where a key had slept longer than some marriages. The indentation was empty, of course. They had brought the spare last night, but near the back corner, half hiding under a stack of note cards, was a curl of blue thread. I didn't pounce. I took my time rescuing my handkerchief and lifting the cards. The thread had the particular dye you get when someone, or some glove, has tied a bit of blue onto metal. Lydia's key had a blue loop. Threads migrate the way gossip does, but they usually leave a breadcrumb trail. I bagged the curl in my handkerchief because it would have been gauche to pull an envelope from my pocket in a stranger's study. "Do you keep polish in here?" I asked. "In the pantry," Mrs. Ahern said from the door. "I use Goddard's for silver, lemon oil for wood." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to see without moving," I said. "Tell me about Saturday." "We stripped the table, I did the linen, I polished the sideboard. I never opened that cabinet. I swear by the keys on my ring." "I don't doubt your ring," I said. "Who else was underfoot?" She considered. "Mr. Julian came late morning to see Mr. Vardis. They had words in the hall. Ms. Rule stopped by to drop papers. She didn't stay. Miss Eleni was in and out, rehearsing lines, I think. And Ms. Calliope came to bring flowers from the church bazaar that did not match the house. Any of them alone in here?" "I don't follow people like a cat," she said with professional dignity. which was as close to yes as I'd get. I am not a constable. Number, you're the reason this house stands up to daylight, I said, which earned me a softening around the eyes that money couldn't buy. One more thing. On Monday, before anyone noticed the absence, did the study look as it does now? She hesitated, then nodded toward the desk. Mr. Vardis sometimes forgets to push in the bottom drawer. I found it open 2 inches that morning. I closed it. I filed that. Drawers open themselves rarely. May I see the pantry? It wasn't a pantry so much as a small civilized arsenal. Rows of bottles and tins labeled in a hand that could have taught handwriting. The lemon oil sat between beeswax and vinegar, 3/4 full. The silver-polished tin had a smudge pattern on the lid like someone with glove seams had pressed down to open it. I lifted it. The cloths were stacked neat. One had a snag. If you had tied thread to a key and the key scraped cloth, you might get a pull like that. I took note of the brand, took nothing else, and went back to the dining room. Eleni appeared like a breeze with intentions. "Are you investigating?" she asked, with the innocence of someone who wants to be included without admitting it. "I'm practicing," I said. "When you went back for your purse that night, who else was lingering?" Her eyes did a quick tour of memory. Aunt Calliope was fussing with the flowers. Uncle Athan was in the study with Julian. Ms. Rule was at the door with her coat. Mr. Kells was talking to Aunt Lydia about delivery of something, I don't know what. "Delivery?" "Documents," she said. "He said he'd messenger them. She said not to, she'd pick them up. Something about not trusting couriers." That was the kind of line that drops a marker. It told me Lydia understood symbols beyond silver. I thanked Eleni and stepped out. She followed me to the hall and lowered her voice. "Mr. Goodwin, my aunt isn't lying." "Good to know," I said. "Is anyone?" She bit her lip. "Julian lies the way other people nap. Miss Rule doesn't lie. She edits. Uncle Athan thinks truth is a matter of posture." She shook her head. "I shouldn't." "You already did," I said, and let her go before she could correct herself back into silence. I phoned Wolfe from the sidewalk because the townhouse's air had too much perfume and not enough oxygen. He took the report without interruptions, which is how I knew he liked it. When I got to the thread, he hummed. "You bagged it." I did. "Good. Mr. Panzer?" "Gone to pet some schedules and see if they purr." "Return," he said. "We will consider the secretary drawer." I headed back in a cab that had opinions about shocks. When I walked into the brownstone, I got Fritz's face, which was calm enough to make you miss the panic. That was a first. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "in the kitchen." He took me there like a man delivering bad news to a surgeon. The room had its usual order, knives in their slots, copper shining, jars of spices like a palette. "Fritz does not merely cook, he composes." "Something is wrong," he said. "Tell me it's not the veal," I said, because humor can sometimes put a floor under a man. He pointed to the shelf. The paprika, third from left, was a shade to the right. That's it. A jar had done the hokey-pokey and turned itself about. I opened my mouth and closed it again because Fritz's hands were steady, but his eyes were not. "I do not move that," he said. "I never move that. It is always aligned with the cumin and the coriander. It is not aligned." You could have laughed. I didn't. Fritz's kitchen is as inviolable as Wolfe's office and his orchid rooms combined. If a spice jar migrates, a trespasser has crossed state lines in this house. "Who's been in here since last night?" I asked. "Only me," he said. "And the man from the grocer, but he leaves boxes by the door. I left the kitchen to serve coffee. 10 minutes. "We had a full house," I said. "Any of them find the wrong door?" "I heard something then," he said, frowning. "A clink. I thought it was the tray in the scullery." I looked at the jar. The lid had a faint powder smear that didn't match Fritz's prints because Fritz doesn't leave prints. He leaves perfection. I got a sheet of paper, wrapped it, and took it to Wolfe like a man delivering a telegram from a small war. He listened, and if the report from the townhouse had pleased him, this one focused him. He leaned forward, which is like a mountain deciding to attend. "Phooey," he said softly, and then, "Goodwin, examine the office." I did. We keep the room as spare as a judge's conscience. The desk blotter was straight. The chairs were where I had put them for the pageant. The beer glass from last night was in the kitchen for washing. Nothing obvious. I checked the phone stand, the ash receiver, the book spines. There was one thing, a sheet of notepaper I had left on the side table with a pencil on it. Only the pencil was now capped. I don't cap pencils. I break the habit in school, not in the house. I went back. "Someone tidied a pencil," I said. "Someone told us two things," Wolfe said. "One, they can transgress a sanctuary and leave a whisper instead of a footprint. Two, they want us to know." "Why bother?" I asked. "Threat? Tease?" "Neither," he said. "A demonstration, a message to me that the symbol of control is susceptible to fingertips, and perhaps a test. Would I notice?" He did not add that we had noticed. "Fritz, really?" I called Saul. He was at a counter reading a menu for a sandwich he had no intention of ordering, watching Julian talk to a man in a shirt with a grease pedigree. "Something off?" he asked when I told him our paprika had learned to dance. "Off," I said. "Keep both eyes. If anyone peels from your quarry and smells like cumin, jot it down." I hung up and turned to Wolfe. "We've got a thread, a smudge, an open drawer, and a spice jar out of line." "And words," he said. "The niece's delivery, Ms. Rule's leverage, Mr. Kells's valid, Mr. Vardis's habit. People package intent inside nouns, Archie. Unwrap them and you'll find the blade." He closed his eyes, which meant the machinery inside had started to hum. I left him to it. The brownstone settled around us, but it didn't settle back. You get used to the difference. There was now a new absence in the house, and it wasn't a knife rest. It was the feeling that if we left anything that could be nudged, someone would. If I had been prone to melodrama, I'd have said the air had a fingerprint. At 3, the phone rang. Saul. Julian's partner just told him the investor got cold feet. He blames family nonsense. He's going to see Rule at 4. Rule just came out of a building where the tenant directory has a locksmith on 2. "Stay with her," I said. "I'm walking with her shadow," Saul said and clicked off. I took that to Wolfe. He opened his eyes and the corners had that notch they get when a piece lands where he wanted. "There it is," he murmured. "The method, not the motive. Bring them back tonight." "All of them?" "All," he said. "And Archie. Buy paprika." I bought the paprika on the way back, 2 tins just to keep Fritz from pacing the floor, though it would take more than spice to steady him. By the time I got home, Wolfe had rearranged the office like a man setting up a chessboard. He hadn't moved an inch from his chair, of course, but the air was taut, the kind you get before an orchestra raises bows. Fritz unpacked the tins without a word, replaced the jar on the shelf with military precision, and went back to his kingdom with the dignity of a man betrayed. I knew enough to leave him alone. Saul phoned at 5:30. His voice was low, like a man reporting from a trench. Julian met Rule. They argued. She called him careless. He called her desperate. He asked if she had the thing to show him. She told him not to be an idiot. Then she walked out and went straight to a locksmith. Spent 20 minutes inside, came out with a small wrapped package. Didn't stop anywhere else. She's headed home now. I repeated it to Wolfe. His eyes narrowed and he rumbled a note like a bass string plucked. As expected. She tested the lock and prepared an alibi. She will not keep us waiting. He pulled the bell cord. Fritz beer. By 6 sharp, the brownstone was once again crowded with Vardises and satellites. They came in like actors who had memorized their lines but didn't trust the script. Lydia first, purse clutched tight, eyes a little brighter than last night. Then Athan, tall and stiff, jaw carrying the weight of insult. Calliope swept in behind him, wrapped in perfume and faint piety. Julian stormed through the door as if trying to kick the hinges loose, trailed by Eleni, who kept her coat buttoned as if armor. Kells was punctual, briefcase in hand, his manner as dry as paper. Rule came last, crisp, brisk, and carrying the air of someone prepared to fight both judge and jury. I'd set the chairs again, and Wolfe sat in his command post behind the desk, immovable. I closed the door, took my seat by the typewriter, and waited for the explosion. Wolfe didn't start with a speech. He let them stir. Lydia smoothed her skirt. Julian tapped his knee. Calliope sighed. Eleni glanced from face to face like a child waiting for thunder. Rule crossed her legs and sharpened her silence. Athan stared at the ceiling. Kells opened his briefcase with a snap, then shut it again when Wolfe's eyes drifted toward him. Finally, Wolfe spoke. A trespass occurred here yesterday evening, during your gathering. Someone left evidence in Mr. Brenner's kitchen, and someone handled objects in this office. That was not clumsiness. It was communication. Someone sought to demonstrate their facility. The silence stretched, tight as piano wire. Rule's eyebrow twitched. Julian snorted. This is absurd. Are we here to hear about paprika? You will hold your tongue, Wolfe said mildly, which in Wolfen language is a thunderclap. Julian sank back, muttering, but the mutter didn't last. Wolfe let the silence settle again before continuing. The knife rest did not simply vanish. It was removed with calculation, and yesterday's trespass was a proof of capability. That proof was unnecessary to me, but apparently gratifying to the culprit. I now know how it was taken. That raised hackles. Calliope leaned forward. Then say it. Accuse. No, Wolfe said. We proceed in order. Each of you will recount again your movements from the night of the dinner through the day before yesterday. This time, omit nothing. I require the trivial as well as the grand. Lies will compound your peril. Kells cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, surely this is irregular. Pfui. You are all irregular. Wolfe's gaze shifted. Ms. Rule. Begin. Rule's jaw tightened. I told you yesterday. I was present for dinner, left by 10:30, returned briefly Saturday morning with papers, stayed only minutes. I have no interest in silver ornaments. You were at a locksmith today, I said. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. My office needed keys cut. For a cabinet, Wolfe asked. Her lips pressed thin. For filing. Archie, Wolfe said. I pulled the little wrapped parcel from my pocket and set it on the desk. Saul had delivered it an hour ago. Wolfe didn't touch it. Awarded blank, cut today, he said, for the cabinet in the Vardis dining room. Do you deny it? Rule's silence was answer enough. Julian leaned forward, triumphant. See? She tried to fake it. Shut up, Wolfe said. And Julian shut. Mr. Kells, Wolfe said. Kells bristled, then composed himself. I confirmed the clause. I prepared documents. I spoke to Lydia about delivery. That is all. I have no use for tokens. My profession rests on signatures, not trinkets. But you spoke of delivery, I said. Eleni heard you. He frowned. I intended to messenger the documents. Mrs. Vardis preferred to collect them. That is her right. Indeed, Wolfe said, but irrelevant. Sit. He shifted in his chair, annoyed at the dismissal. Calliope launched before being prompted. I admired the piece. I left by 11, as I said. I visited Saturday to bring flowers, yes, but I never touched that cabinet. I never sought to control anything. Sophia's wishes are her own. Her tone was lofty, but her eyes darted toward Athan, and Wolfe caught it. Mr. Vardis. Nathan's voice was dry. I told you. I never cared. My mother's theatrics should have been ignored. You cared enough to keep your key, Wolfe said. Habit. Your study drawer was left open, I said. He blinked. I don't recall. You wouldn't, Wolfe murmured, if someone else opened it. Nathan's jaw tightened. Julian, Wolfe said. Julian leaned forward, eager to push suspicion anywhere else. I want to build something, yes, but I don't need to steal. I'd have asked. If Aunt Lydia wanted me to have it, she'd have said. She did not, Wolfe said flatly. Julian reddened. That doesn't mean I took it. Eleni, Wolfe said. The niece sat straighter. I told you. I saw it in the cabinet when I went for my purse. The lock was intact. I never touched it. Yet you described the light catching it, Wolfe said. Most would not recall a reflection. You observed closely. She flushed. Because I thought it ridiculous. Not because I wanted it. Wolfe leaned back, fingers folding. So, each of you denies, equivocates, or evades, yet the knife rest is gone. Who has it? I know. You have shown me. That pulled the room taut. Lydia's hands tightened on her purse. Julian shifted. Rule's eyes narrowed. Calliope exhaled sharply. Eleni looked ready to cry. Nathan looked away. Kells adjusted his cufflink. Wolfe closed his eyes. Tomorrow at 10, return. By then I will have laid it bare. Until then, I advise you, guard your words. They betray you more than your hands. It was dismissal, and they felt it. One by one they rose, muttering, sighing, simmering. Rule stormed out without a word. Julian slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Calliope lingered just long enough to lay a hand on Lydia's shoulder. Nathan stalked down the steps as if the stone had insulted him. Kells nodded to me, curt and dry, then left. Eleni glanced back once, wide-eyed, then followed her aunt. When the house was empty again, Wolfe breathed out through his nose. A family, he said, is an orchestra without a conductor. They produce noise. It requires a baton. Which you'll wave tomorrow, I said. Yes. Tonight we let them imagine the downbeat. He reached for his beer. Archie, secure the parcel from Ms. Rule and the thread you found. Tomorrow they will have their stage. The knife rest is not the only token missing. Dignity also wanders. That was as much as I was going to get. I filed the evidence, locked the drawer, and thought about paprika, silver, and symbols. Wolfe had them in his net, but I knew him well enough to know he was still tightening the weave. Tomorrow would bring the snap. I slept the way you do when a room's been full of people who left part of themselves in the carpet. Light and not very. By 8, Fritz had made peace with his shelves, and the paprika sat where it belonged, looking innocent, which is the spice jar equivalent of a smirk. Wolfe did not smirk. He ate, read 3 pages of the Gazette without permitting the headlines to contaminate the eggs, and told me, between sips of coffee, that I would go see Mr. Kells and return with a sentence. Just a sentence? I asked. The sentence, he said. The clause in the will that converts silver into sovereignty. Bring me its exact language and any appendices or codicils Mrs. Sophia Vardis imposed upon her progeny. Precision, Archie. When a man like Wolfe asks for precision, he means you'll be weighing commas on a jeweler's scale. I put on a tie that said, respectable parasite, and headed midtown. Kells's office had the same cheerful ambience as a prudent mausoleum. The receptionist had filed herself into a navy suit, and the copy of the Wall Street Journal had never been read by human eyes. I asked for Kells. She said he had a full morning. I said Nero Wolfe had an empty chair. She made a call and discovered his morning had a surprising opening. He met me at his door with his smile on time and his soul on retainer. Inside, the wood was darker, and the diplomas were the color of expensive obedience. He motioned me to a chair, opened a file without letting it breathe, and said, Mr. Goodwin, I Confess I don't know why this triviality requires our attention. The trust has an administrator. It is Mrs. Lydia Vardis. We are merely reading a sentence, I said. Out loud. Slowly. He adjusted his glasses like a man preparing to swear. Very well. He found the page by instinct. Clause 37. Administration of household funds and associated charitable disbursements. It is my wish and direction that the person in physical custody of the knife rest, described in Appendix C, at the time of the reading of this, shall administer the Vardis family household trusts for a period of 5 years, renewable upon my heirs' unanimous consent. Physical custody shall be defined as possession and willingness to present the token at the reading upon request. I let silence do the arithmetic. Not at the time of death, then, I said. At the reading. Yes, he said too quickly. Mrs. Vardis initially proposed, at time of my passing, but we advised against ambiguities. She wanted something ceremonial. Appendix C. He turned a page. An item of silver, bearing a maker's mark A. Ducas and a shallow groove for resting a carving knife. Length 8 inches. A family emblem. That's the gist. When is the reading? The formal reading already occurred last month, he said, and waited to see if I would drown. However, there is a supplemental memorandum concerning the household trusts, the clause you just heard, which Mrs. Vardis executed 6 months ago. The memorandum calls for a separate acknowledgement of the administrator. He cleared his throat. At my office. Today. What time? 11, he said, eyes impassive. We notified the family that whoever wishes to be recognized as administrator must present the token then, in my presence, with witnesses. Witnesses you choose, I said. Of course, he said, and almost smiled. We are the custodians of order here, Mr. Goodwin. I stood. Order's getting a workout. He didn't escort me out, because men like Kells have evolved beyond it. In the hall, I called Wolfe. He answered on the second ring, which meant his orchids were permitting it. Today at 11, I said. Token must be presented in Kells's office. Possession equals appointment. Ah, he said. It wasn't happiness, but it was the sound it would make if it wore a darker suit. Then our culprit prepared 2 things yesterday, a demonstration and a run at legitimacy. Return. I returned. On the way, I detoured to a locksmith, the locksmith. Saul had given me the name and the address like a man handing a friend a map out of a swamp. The shop had the smell of brass filings and old intentions. A man with a face like a friendly vice was putting new teeth on a key blank. You cut a warded blank yesterday, I said, flipping my license. For a woman in a grey jacket. Sharp voice. Bought. 1 piece. Cash. He eyed the license the way a turtle eyes lettuce. I cut a lot of blanks. This one for a cabinet lock with a shallow ward and a lazy spring. She didn't bring the lock. She brought a rubbing. That got me a twitch. I don't break laws, mister. I didn't say you did. Did she ask you to match a cabinet like this? I traced the simple ward shape in the air. He watched my finger as if it were betraying a trade secret. She asked if a blank could be cut to fit a common antique cabinet, he said carefully. I said if you had the lock, sure. She paid for a demo and a basic ward key that might go in. That's not illegal. Noted, I said. Anybody else asking about antiques this week? He hesitated, then shrugged. Lady with a hat on Tuesday. Fancy. Said she wanted to secure a cabinet, not open one. Asked what stops a man with a skeleton key. Answer? Not much. She didn't buy. Hat? I said. Angle like it was trying to hold on to Sunday. He grunted. If you say so. Calliope had gone shopping for righteousness. I thanked him and left him to his legitimate evasions. Back at the brownstone, I found Fritz polishing a spoon that already reflected my sins. He said nothing. which is Fritz's way of saying he is ready to forgive the world when it admits its error. In the office, Wolfe had put a single sheet of paper in the center of his desk as if it were a guest. I gave him Kells's sentence verbatim. He closed his eyes and repeated it back to me with better punctuation than Kells had managed. So the administrator is whoever marches into Kells's office at 11 with the thing in hand, I said. That makes motive a sprint, not a marathon. It clarifies their agitation, he said. And the trespass here, our paprika and your pencil, was a hand raised in class. Someone wished to declare competence to me. Perhaps also to warn me that competence extends to any room, including mine. A challenge, he considered, and an error. How so? Competence craves audience, he said. Our thief required mine. Vanity leaks. It will pool. Meanwhile, I said, Kells is waiting to crown whoever shows up with 8 inches of silver. No, Wolfe said. Kells is waiting to observe a performance that will fail at the second act. We will supply the failure. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz, beer. At 10:30, while Wolfe refreshed himself, I had the happy job of phoning our cast. I told them Mr. Kells's office expected a presentation at 11, and Mr. Wolfe expected their attendance here at noon. The responses covered a familiar range. Lydia composed and monosyllabic, Athan insulted by logistics, Calliope outraged at the theatricality she privately craved, Julian hungry and harried, Rule curt, Eleni breathless. Kells I didn't call. He had his own dais. By 10:50, Saul checked in from a doorway across the street from Kells's. Building 2 arrivals, he said. Calliope, hat at an angle gravity can't fix. Lydia, on time and carrying her purse like a life raft. No silver visible. Julian is jogging because the subway offended him. Rule's not here yet. Athan's car just pulled up. Stay, I said. If the thing shows, it will show briefly. Or not at all, Saul said. 5 will get you 10, nobody produces it. They'll try to produce rights instead. Spoken like a man who's watched attorneys eat lunch, I said, and hung up. Wolfe didn't attend the reading because the brownstone is his body, and he doesn't transplant. He had me sit, pen ready, while he arranged words in his head like furniture. At 11:15 the phone rang. Saul. No token, he said. Kells read the sentence to them as if it were a lullaby. Lydia asked if the object's absence delayed the appointment. Kells said the clause requires production. Athan said the clause is idiotic. Calliope called it blasphemy to tie money to cutlery. Rule arrived at 11:08, late and unrepentant. She watched, didn't speak. Eleni stood by the window counting pigeons. Kells adjourned. Noon at Wolfe's? Noon, I said. Bring your shadow. Already attached, Saul said. Before noon, we did something unusual. Wolfe told me to put the envelope with the keys on his desk and to place the locksmith's blank beside it, still wrapped. He also told me to put the little curl of blue thread on a white card so it would show. We will not do tricks, he said. We will do exposures. They'll accuse you of tricks anyway, I said. Let them, he said. I prefer being accused of capacity to being accused of credulity. They arrived with the punctuality of people who believe time can be beaten into shape by disapproval. Lydia first, pale, eyes steady. Athan taut and brittle. Calliope scented and severe. Julian flushed from righteous exercise. Rule cold and edged. Kells even and dry. Eleni, eyes big, mouth compressed as if holding words in escrow. Saul took a chair at the back and became less visible than the furniture. I closed the door. Wolfe didn't begin with a welcome. He looked at Kells. You read the clause? He said. I did, Kells said. No one presented the token. Of course not, Wolfe said. It no longer resides where it did, and only one of you can afford to be seen with it. That person would prefer to present it under conditions that guarantee recognition, not merely spectacle. Rule folded her arms. If you have a point, Mr. Wolfe, draw it. I have more than one, he said, and let his gaze move, unhurried, to the desk, then to their faces. The cabinet lock in your dining room is warded and sloppy. A rubbing of its ward pattern would permit a blank to be cut that might enter and turn if the spring were oiled. On Saturday, someone handled lemon oil in the study. On Sunday, someone sat at the secretary where the spare is kept and left a curl of blue thread that does not belong there. Yesterday afternoon, in this house, someone touched what should not be touched and aligned what should not be aligned to demonstrate nerve. Calliope bristled. An accusation by implication is still an accusation. Patience, Wolfe said mildly. Mr. Goodwin, I took the white card with the blue thread and lifted it so they could see. It was nothing much, that curl, but it made a better speech than most men. Lydia's eyes moved to it and back to Wolfe's face. Rule glanced and dismissed. Kells tried to decide if it could be notarized. Eleni stared as if it were a worm that had crawled out of a book. Julian scowled at it for failing to be money. Athan refused to look. Threads migrate, Wolfe said, but not at random. This one is the pigment and texture of the loop that distinguishes one of the cabinet keys. The loop on Mrs. Lydia Vardis's key. He turned his head a fraction. Madame, at some point you opened the secretary drawer and placed your key there, near the tray where the spare lives. Lydia's back straightened. I looked to see whether the spare was missing, she said. I did not remove it. She took a breath. I will not be made timid by caution, Mr. Wolfe. You will not be made anything by me, he said. Others have attempted that service. Julian couldn't sit on his words any longer. So what? She checked the spare. That doesn't make her a thief. No, Wolfe said, but it makes her a custodian who knows what she guards. That knowledge is what our thief exploited. Athan shifted, irritation leaking through the stitches. Enough drama. Say what you mean. I will, Wolfe said. He rested his hands on the arms of the chair. The knife rest is not lost to the world. It has not been sold. It has been secreted briefly to manufacture urgency and to weaken a claim. Lydia's claim to present it at Kells's office and so be appointed administrator. The removal served two functions: to frighten her into blundering and to purchase time for a rival to prepare a show of possession. But our rival encountered a problem: legitimacy. If he or she produces the token suddenly, suspicion attaches. Better, then, to stage theft, demonstrate competence before me, and then, today, arrange its miraculous return in a way that looks like rescue. Rule smiled without pleasure. Who's your miracle worker? Not you, Wolfe said. Your locksmith excursion was insurance, not execution, and primarily vanity. A rehearsal. Mr. Kells, your participation is institutional, not personal. Ms. Demos, you shop for sermons, not skeleton keys. Mr. Vardis, you dislike being managed too much to engineer this delicacy. Mr. Julian Vardis. He let the name hang in the air. You possess motive in barrels, but you lack the patience to make a rubbing without tearing the paper. Which leaves... Eleni made a small sound, and Lydia's hand shot to her arm, not to restrain, but to steady. The person who watches closely, Wolfe finished, who notices light on glass, who loves her aunt enough to hate the family's meanness, who is nimble and underestimated, who could move in rooms without drawing attention, the person who could remove a token not to steal it, but to save it from the wrong presentation. Eleni's breath hitched. Lydia whispered her name. Not yet, Wolfe said, still mild. We will not convict a girl for loyalty before we permit her to speak. Archie, fetch the envelope. I did, set it by his hand. Wolfe didn't touch it. He looked at Eleni. We will now proceed without theatrics. You will tell us where it is. Eleni didn't look at Wolfe when he said it. She looked at Lydia, and if loyalty had a sound, it was in the little catch she made before she got her voice steady. I didn't steal it, she said, which is a statement everybody loves until it grows legs. I took it so no one else could. Lydia's hand stayed on her arm, not tight, a kind of brace. Why? Because Julian told Uncle Athan he was going to solve the problem, she said, the quotes making themselves heard. Saturday, in the hall, I heard them. She swallowed. He said, if the thing is all that stands between me and signatures, I'll have it on Monday. And Uncle Athan said, do what you want. It's a trinket. You were upstairs, Aunt Lydia. You didn't hear, and Ms. Rule had told him the clause depended on showing it. He said so. He said, Max says possession makes the appointment. She shot Rule a look that wasn't quite accusation because she wasn't built for that yet. Rule's mouth ticked. I explained what the clause meant to a client. Explaining is not conspiring. Wolfe did not indicate interest in the shades between. Proceed, he said to Eleni. I didn't know how to stop them without making a scene, she said. Aunt Lydia kept the key in her purse. She trusts me. She looked down. I borrowed it, only for an hour. I went to the study because I thought if the spare was missing, then my borrowing wouldn't matter. I'd put it back. She shook her head. The spare was there. I put Aunt Lydia's key on the tray for a second while I moved things to look. A thread must have... She looked at the little curl on Wolfe's card and winced. Then I thought, if Julian has a way, if he can get a key or pick the lock, he'll use it Sunday or Monday. So I went to the pantry. I knew where the lemon oil was because Mrs. Ahern lets me help sometimes. I oiled the lock because I'd seen a video and I thought... She stopped, embarrassed by her own education. I opened it with the spare. I took the knife rest. I wiped the glass so no one would see they'd left their handprints. I put Aunt Lydia's key back in her purse. I put the spare back in the tray. I went to my room and I hid it. Where? Wolfe said. In my coat, she said, voice small now that we were down to brass tacks. There's a hem lining. You can stitch the bottom and it becomes a pocket. I sewed it in. I thought, if someone searches my room, they won't pat the hem. She glanced at Julian and then away, too fast to be proof and just fast enough to be true. Julian made a noise. Athan made another, older and more offended. Calliope exhaled like a choir. Kells said, almost gently, as if that would help. Miss Eleni, removing the token, I know, she said, and then her jaw settled. But I also know Aunt Lydia is supposed to administer the trusts because Sophia wanted stability, not because a man can sprint and grab a thing. You misapprehend your grandmother, Calliope began, because saints need defending, but Wolfe lifted a finger, and that was all the theology we were going to entertain. You brought it here, he said to Eleni. It wasn't a question. In your coat. Yesterday. And you touched my kitchen to see whether I would perceive you. Her eyes flew to him. Ah, yes. I wanted you to know I could move what other people don't see. So you would look at me. Not because I wanted to be blamed, but because if you knew I could, you would ask me why. And I could tell you, and you would understand before they... She gestured at the room, made it into something else. That's the kind of naivete that sometimes grows into judgment when it survives. Lydia squeezed her arm once, hard, and let go. Wolfe's lids came down and lifted. The pencil cap. I'm sorry, she said, flushing. It was childish, but Yes. And the paprika. She looked stricken. Fritz, Mr. Brenner. I didn't mean to insult him, It was the smallest thing I could move that would be noticed by the person who keeps order. I'm sorry. From the kitchen, a soft, authoritative clink said Fritz had heard and chosen for the moment mercy. He'd feed her later anyway. That's Fritz. He forgives in courses. Your coat, Wolfe said. Her hand went to it reflexively and stopped. She looked at Lydia again. Aunt? Lydia's answer was to stand. Give it to Mr. Goodwin, she said, and there was relief and regret braided together in the syllables. We will not sneak in this house. Eleni unbuttoned with fingers that wanted to shake and made them not. I took the coat, felt the weight in the hem. There it was, an 8-inch argument. I handed the coat to Wolfe, who didn't touch it, then to Saul, who did, gently, and produced a pocket knife no policeman would object to. He slit 2 stitches the way you part a curtain in a church, and slid out the silver. It was a handsome piece if you're sentimental about metal. Shallow groove, maker's mark, the darkening in the creases that comes when polish stops at the obvious. It lay on Wolfe's, blotter like a small animal that had slept and would wake where directed. Nobody breathed. Julian did first, because impatience isn't subject to awe. So that's it. She admits it, she took it. You going to call the police or crown her? Wolfe's eyes went to him and cooled a half-degree. We will do neither, he said. Miss Eleni's act was theft of a kind, yes. But it was rescue in intention. The law cares for the first, I care for the second, and the second tells me whose hands she frustrated. She frustrated all of us, Athan said, indignant at being included in any category with other people. No, Wolfe said. She frustrated a schedule. The 11 o'clock appointment sprung with a speed that favored only those who had advance notice and the nerve to appear with an object that had just, by miraculous coincidence, reappeared. Who among you could time that? Not Mr. Kells. His institutional propriety prefers letters to ambush. Not Ms. Demos. She favors ceremony, not surprises. Mr. Vardis would have blustered and delayed. Mr. Julian would have tried, yes, and failed with noise. Ms. Rule. He turned his head and considered her as if tasting a sauce. Could have engineered it, but she did not, because this means less to her than being right. Rule's shoulder made a line. Then who? She asked. Cool, because cool is currency. The person who enjoys order enough to weaponize it, Wolfe said. Who knows the desk drawers, and when they are left ajar, who hears everything, sees everything, and considers herself the guardian of the way things are done. Who would abhor a knife rest being used to manipulate money, and also abhor the wrong person being recognized as administrator, not because she loves power, but because she hates impropriety. The person who keeps the house breathing. He looked toward the door to the hall. For a fraction, I thought he meant Fritz. Then I saw where his eyes actually settled, and so did Lydia. Mrs. Ahern, Wolfe said not loudly. She had been in the doorway for perhaps half a minute, tray in hand, because that is what you carry when you don't know whether you're welcome. She set it on the table with the care you use with soup near white linen. Sir, she said, and her voice had the steady of a metronome you could set your day by. You signaled me yesterday by leaving the spice jar misaligned, Wolfe said. Not Miss Eleni. Her trespasses were whispers. Yours was a note, purposely wrong in a room where wrong rings. You wanted me to know competence. Yes, but not only hers. You wanted me to suspect that competence lives also in hands that know where lemon oil is kept and which drawer Mr. Vardis forgets to close. You opened that drawer on Monday and closed it after someone had been there. Your own words gave you away. You would not have noticed unless you knew you were looking. You were looking because on Saturday you found the cabinet unlocked after Miss Eleni had done her work, and you locked it again. And you told yourself you would tell Mrs. Lydia when it served, not when it burst. Mrs. Ahern didn't flinch under it. She looked at Lydia first, not in guilt, but in a way I won't insult by describing. I run a house, she said simply. I do not run a family. But when a family uses a house to hurt each other, I take offense. Miss Eleni told me Sunday night what she had done. She thought she'd ruined things. I told her she'd saved a day and bought us another. I asked her to bring it here, not to the lawyer. I don't trust lawyers to understand kitchens. Kells made a small ecclesiastical noise. Rule's eyebrow rose half an inch. Calliope crossed herself without committing theology. Julian snorted his contempt and didn't make it to completion because Lydia spoke. You decided for me. Lydia said. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't gratitude. It was observation. Twice. Yes, Mrs. Ahern said, unapologetic. Because you would decide rightly when you had room to breathe. I make room. That's my work. I've never had children, madam, but men and women drop crumbs the same in any house. I sweep for you, and when a boy talks about presenting a token like a rabbit from a hat, I take the hat away. Julian surged. You had no right. You have made your mother's house ashamed of itself, she said to him without raising her voice. Mr. Wolfe, I touched your paprika because I wanted to see if you were the kind of man who notices when a jar is wrong. You are. So I came to the door and listened. You are forgiven, Fritz said from the kitchen, which is the closest I've heard him come to poetry. Wolfe exhaled, not a sigh. More a redistribution. So, 2 acts then. The first, Miss Eleni removed the token to save it from a rushed fraud. The second, the housekeeper, who knows the architecture of everyone's appetite, guided the token to me, not to Kells, because she understands that kitchens and offices both require a man who will not be rushed. Nathan spread his hands. Very well. We have the trinket. Give it to Lydia, and let her parade it to Kells to collect her crown. No, Wolfe said. There is a third act. We will not parade. We will conclude. Rule leaned back. Meaning you're going to say who tried to game the appointment? I will, Wolfe said. Because Miss Eleni's removal was reactive, not creative. The initiative belonged elsewhere, with the person who insisted on today's 11 o'clock recognition, who telegraphed the schedule under the bunting of propriety, who primed one faction to be ready and another to be late. Whoever arranged the clock believed the token would either be produced by a compliant tool or, if missing, would cast doubt where useful. That person is clever, not patient enough to wait 5 years, not blunt enough to steal, and not foolish enough to be seen carrying silver. Kells found his throat. You are implying, I'm stating, Wolfe said. But I will state to advantage and with fewer interruptions when you are all seated tomorrow morning and I have had my beer in peace. At 9. Tomorrow, Julian barked. How many times are we going to do this dance? As many as it takes to teach you rhythm, Wolfe said. He looked at Lydia. Madam, the token will remain in my custody overnight. His palm dipped barely toward the silver on his desk. It will not leave this room. You may appoint counsel to scratch at my door if it comforts you. It will not change. Lydia stood for a second longer than comfort requires, and then nodded once. Mr. Wolfe, I accept that. She turned to Eleni. You and I will talk, but not like vultures. Eleni's eyes brightened in the way that makes men mistake youth for weakness. Yes, Aunt. Calliope gathered her bag as if lifting a chalice. Sophia would have enjoyed this, she mused. Not the squabbling, the ceremony. Your saint liked a good argument, I said. She did, Calliope said, and for the first time her smile wasn't aimed at an audience. They filed out less like actors and more like people who had used up their cues. Kells left me a look that said he'd draft a letter. Rule left Wolfe a look that said she'd draft a war and enjoy it. Athan left the carpet his tread and not an ounce more. Julian left a forecast of weather. Lydia left the room smaller and cleaner than she'd found it, which is a trick I could stand to learn. When the door clicked, Wolfe stayed still. Fritz came in and took the tray and set a fresh glass down as if resetting the universe. I will cook a stew, he announced, which in our house is a sacrament. Do, Wolfe said. He didn't touch the glass yet. He watched the silver. Symbols, he said, almost to himself. Men will break families upon them. Women will mend families with them, and houses. Houses remember the hands that move what belongs. He looked at me. You will be in Mr. Kells's office at 8:30. Ask who proposed today's 11 o'clock. Do not accept procedure as an answer. Copy that, I said. And Archie, he added, as Fritz reached the door. "See that our kitchen remains unmolested." Fritz answered for me, with dignity and paprika. "It will." Kells's office was more awake the next morning, though you wouldn't know it from the receptionist, who regarded me like a man who'd tracked mud across her polished foyer. I told her Nero Wolfe required a straight answer about procedure, and I wasn't leaving until I had it. She gave me a look that could have gone on a credit report, then called through. Kells emerged himself, tie the exact shade of dull authority, and waved me in with the civility of a man who prefers paper to people. Inside, the files were squared to corners and the air smelled of carpet cleaner and law. He gestured at a chair, and I took it, notebook open. He perched behind his desk like a crow on a ledger. "Mr. Goodwin," he said evenly, "I trust you have no objection to clarity, but I remind you I serve the family, not your employer." "Then you won't mind telling me who picked yesterday's 11 o'clock curtain call," I said. He didn't blink. It was standard practice. The memorandum called for acknowledgement within 30 days. We scheduled such readings mid-morning. 11 was convenient. "Convenient for who?" I asked. "Because I can't help but notice it wasn't convenient for half your clients." Julian came in sweating. Rule arrived late, and Calliope thought she was at a church bazaar. Someone knew exactly when to have their ducks lined up. "Who told you 11 was the hour?" Kells adjusted a page that didn't need adjusting. "Mrs. Vardis asked for expediency. She called last week. She wished the matter concluded swiftly. 11 was offered. She agreed." "Which Mrs. Vardis?" "Lydia," he said, and the syllables landed with the weight of granite. I watched him as I wrote it down. He didn't twitch. His hands stayed flat on the desk. He wanted me to take it at face value. Too smooth, too neat. Lydia had come to Wolfe's house like a woman desperate for a mind that wasn't hers. She didn't arrange deadlines. Someone had put her name on the clock and expected it to ring. "All right," I said, closing the notebook. "That's your story. Wolfe will hear it. If you have footnotes, you may want to type them tonight." He didn't rise when I left. Outside, I called Wolfe. He picked up after the second ring, which meant the orchids were trimmed and Fritz had delivered breakfast. "He says Lydia requested 11 sharp," I told him. There was a pause, the kind you don't fill. Then, "Pfui. He lies badly, or worse, tells the truth well. Return." I returned, and by the time I walked into the office, Wolfe had the silver resting on his desk like a paperweight from Olympus. He had a fresh beer, and Fritz had set a small plate of rye crisps within reach. He listened to my report without moving a muscle, then closed his eyes. "Not Lydia," he said finally. She would never hasten a decision she hoped to dignify. Someone used her name. Kells colluded or consented through cowardice. That is the lever. "So what's the fulcrum?" I asked. "Today," he said. "We have our stage. At 9 sharp, they will come again. And this time, Archie, they will hear their own words returned to them with clarity." By 8:50, the Brownstones' hall smelled of perfume, starch, and nerves. Lydia arrived first, pale but composed, Eleni beside her with eyes darting like a bird's. Athan strode in behind, exuding disdain as though it were cologne. Calliope followed, hat firm enough to tilt authority. Julian stormed in late, as expected, muttering about traffic. Rule came brisk and unbothered. Kells trailed last, briefcase neat, face carved into neutrality. Saul was already there, folding himself into a corner like an umbrella waiting for rain. I shut the door. Wolfe sat in his chair, mountain calm, silver on his blotter. When the room was tight with silence, he opened his eyes. "You were told to appear," he said. "You are here. You believe you will hear who stole a knife rest. You are wrong. You will hear who attempted to use it. Theft is crude. This was not crude. It was orchestration, timed to a clock, layered with signals, concealed by propriety." Julian shifted. "Get to it. You will hold your impatience," Wolfe said, and the words pinned Julian like a nail. "First, Miss Eleni." She removed the object from the cabinet to prevent her cousin from producing it at yesterday's reading. That act, misguided but loyal, bought us time. Second, Mrs. Ahern ensured that time was not squandered by guiding the token here. Both these acts were reactive. Neither was the origin. He let the air still before shifting his gaze. The origin was the scheduling of yesterday's 11 o'clock appointment under Mrs. Lydia's name. That was false. Mrs. Lydia never requested it. Yet Kells claims she did. All eyes turned to Kells. He cleared his throat. "You only obeyed," Wolfe said. "And obedience, in your profession, is a veil. Someone asked you to name Lydia as the requester. Someone who would benefit if suspicion fell on her, if she appeared grasping, hasty, desperate to secure recognition before doubts intruded. That is not her character. It is, however, the character of another." Calliope's lips parted, ready to protest, but Wolfe's hand rose, halting her, his eyes fixed on Rule. "Miss Rule," he said, "you advised Julian about the clause. You mocked him for carelessness. You cut a blank yesterday to test the lock. You knew possession was the only qualification. You also knew that Lydia's dignity was her strongest shield. Remove that, and her claim weakens. Who benefits? Not Julian, who would have bungled the timing. Not Athen, who calls it a trinket. Not Calliope, who seeks ceremony, not ambush. Not Kells, who hides behind documents. You who lives on leverage." Rule smiled faintly, the kind of smile you wear when caught, but not yet chained. "Interesting theory." "Not theory," Wolfe said. "Fact. You arranged for the appointment under Lydia's name, knowing she would appear startled and unprepared. You intended to produce the token found through Julian or through your own hand with a forged key, and claim rescue. You would then attach yourself to the administrator, whichever relative accepted your competence. Power by proxy." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't prove that." "Proof?" Wolfe said, voice mild. "Proof lies in words. You told Julian, possession makes the appointment. You arrived late yesterday, because you expected to arrive with triumph, not with emptiness. You sought a locksmith's blank, not because you lacked opportunity, but because you miscalculated Miss Eleni. She anticipated theft and preempted you. You trespassed here, moving spice and pencil to remind me of competence, yours. But vanity exposes you. I have no need to prove. I need only to state. And now I state. You orchestrated the maneuver, failed, and hoped blame would fracture the family further. It has not." For the first time, Rule's composure cracked. Her lips tightened, eyes darting not to Wolfe, but to Julian, who had gone pale with something between rage and embarrassment. Athan sat back, smug. Calliope murmured something about divine justice, and Eleni held Lydia's hand. Kells cleared his throat again, but softer this time. "Mr. Wolfe, what is to be done?" "Nothing," Wolfe said. "The law does not punish ambition. Mrs. Lydia retains the token. The family may confirm her as administrator. Ms. Rule may continue counting, but her leverage is ash. That is resolution." The room stirred, some in relief, some in resentment. Julian muttered, but no one listened. Calliope made the sign of the cross. Athan demanded coffee. Lydia, steady at last, inclined her head to Wolfe. "Thank you," she said. When they left, Wolfe didn't move until the door clicked shut behind them. He picked up the knife rest with 2 fingers, considered it, and set it gently into the envelope on his desk. Then he exhaled. "Archie," he said, "the world does not collapse upon theft of metal. It collapses upon theft of dignity. Remember that." Fritz appeared in the doorway, eyebrows calm again. "Lunch," he announced. Wolfe closed his eyes and let the air cool. "I closed my notebook and thought about paprika," Silver, and the kind of vanity that makes people move jars in kitchens. The case was over, but the brownstone had that weight it gets when Wolfe has decided the world has been reminded of its folly. And when Wolfe decides that, you don't argue. You just eat lunch. The knife rest lay on Wolfe's desk in its envelope for exactly the time it takes Fritz to announce lunch, serve it, and clear away any trace that the world had been foolish that morning. After coffee, Wolfe told me to call Kells and inform him that Mrs. Lydia would be presenting the token at 3, witnessed by her counsel of choice, with Saul and me in attendance for the sake of memory. Kells accepted this like a man accepting rainfall, annoyed but prepared to pretend he'd scheduled it. I phoned Lydia. She said, "Thank you," the way a woman says it when she has stopped borrowing a backbone and settled into her own. Elaine's voice came faintly in the background, and then vanished. I didn't ask what it said. If there's one thing I've learned in this racket, it's that not every word you can hear belongs to you. At 2:20, Saul and I took a cab that believed in potholes as character builders. Wolfe didn't come. The brownstone is a country that issues no visas. He gave me one instruction on the way out. Watch the lawyer's eyes, not his signature. That's Wolfe. He treats faces like documents and documents like props. Kells's office had rearranged itself into ceremony. The receptionist had upgraded her neutrality to cordial suspicion. Inside, Kells had parked a witness, another attorney with hair parted by a ruler, and a secretary who could type with the kind of accuracy that makes men confess. Lydia arrived 5 minutes early, Eleni with her, and kept back by the door, hands linked in front like a promise to behave. She carried nothing that jingled. Erthan arrived at the stroke, took one look at the envelope on the desk, and schooled his face into a polite disagreement with reality. Calliope was next, appropriately solemn. Julian didn't make it. Traffic, ambition, gravity, or all three. Rule didn't show, which fit. You don't attend a ceremony you tried to replace with a trick. Saul took a chair by the window and became glass. Kells called it to order with the crispness of a man who likes control best when it has a seal on it. He recited Clause 37 with the kind of rhythm you don't get in poetry and finished with, "Present the token at the reading upon request." Then he looked at Lydia because paper said he should, and the room remembered to breathe on cue. Lydia didn't rush. She looked to me. I opened Wolfe's envelope like a man opening a box that used to contain something poisonous and now contains a cure. I didn't touch the silver. I tipped the envelope and let it slide onto the blotter. Kells's secretary recorded every blink. Kells examined the piece with a penlight, which was not necessary, but made him feel useful. He found the maker's mark and nodded like a man recognizing his own initials. "Acknowledged," he said, and the word did what it's built to do, turn air into conclusion. There was signing. Witnesses took their turns. The secretary's keys chattered like fast rain. Erthan signed with the air of a man authorizing lunch. Calliope made a small, private gesture that could have been prayer or punctuation. Eleni watched the pen more than the people, which told me where she keeps her faith. At the end, Kells slid a copy toward Lydia and another toward a leather folder that would be filed and sleep until someone needed to wake it with a lawsuit. "Congratulations, Mrs. Vardis," he said. He meant it partly. The other part belonged to the habit of law that congratulates itself. Lydia took the paper and then the silver, and for a second I thought she'd tucked the token into her purse. She didn't. She looked at Eleni. Eleni flinched, then steadied. Lydia set the knife rest on the table again. "Mr. Kells," she said, "we will keep this in our cabinet. Locked with the lock replaced, but I will administer the trusts as they were intended, without theatrics and without speed. You will not schedule ceremonies in my name that I have not requested. If you require instruction, you may call me. If I require counsel, I will call you." For a woman who had walked into our office 2 days ago asking a stranger to see through her family, it was a tidy way to tell a lawyer who currently owned the future. Kells nodded, not a bow, more a concession to gravity. "As you wish," he said, and you could tell he would. Men who survive their profession learn to tell the difference between a storm and a climate. Lydia had just changed the weather. We left without anybody saying something they'd regret. In the hall, Eleni exhaled the kind of breath you hold for 2 days, because you think if you let it go, the structure that's keeping everyone from falling might collapse. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Will he be angry? Julian?" "He'll pick a new noun," I said. "Anger, resentment, ambition. He's got a dictionary. It's not your job to edit him. It's your job to keep the pages numbered so they don't get lost." She didn't understand now, not fully, but she would. Lydia squeezed her hand, and they left with something like equilibrium, which for a family is as close to happiness as most of us should trust. Saul and I rode back in silence that wasn't empty. He got out 2 blocks early to talk to a man who didn't know he had information to sell yet. Saul has his own ceremonies. I carried the empty envelope home like a relic that had been used up doing what it was made to do. In the office, Wolfe listened to my relay with eyes closed. I gave him the lines, the sequence, the glances, all the protein, none of the fat. When I got to Lydia's speech about scheduling, his mouth lifted enough to count. "Good," he said. "She will be inconvenient to the right people." "Meaning Kells and any relative who confuses speed with virtue?" I said. "Meaning anyone who believes symbols require applause to have meaning," he said. He opened his eyes. "Bring Fritz." Fritz came with the ease of a man for whom rooms cooperate. Wolfe told him the kitchen had been restored, the paprika realigned, the insult forgiven. Fritz accepted the verdict with a short nod and, because he is incapable of leaving dignity unadorned, set down a small plate of cookies that had not existed 10 minutes before. I took one. It tasted like a treaty that would hold. The afternoon tried to drift toward normal. Wolfe visited the orchids and lectured them on the importance of patience. I typed up notes in a way that would make sense 6 months from now when memory grows trick edges. Around 4, the phone rang. "Rule." She didn't waste time on greetings. "Is the sermon over?" she asked. "If by sermon you mean that moment in a church when even the sinners stop looking at their watches." "Yes," I said. "You've won yourself a moral victory," she said. "They're the cheapest kind." "Funny," I said. "We were just saying the most expensive kind is the kind that costs you your leverage." A pause. "You think I'll lose clients over this?" "I think you'll keep the ones who like how you count and lose the ones who noticed you tried to arrange the clock. And I think if you move a spice jar in your own kitchen, you'll remember who saw you do it here." She made a sound that could have been a laugh if laughter smoked. "Tell Wolfe he misjudges me. I like competence. I don't worship it." "He'll sleep tonight anyway," I said. "I hope he does," she said, and hung up with the cordiality of a fencer saluting before the next bout. By 5, it was all sweepings. Saul reported Julian had pivoted to a new investor whose handshake would need soap. Calliope sent flowers that matched our house and would survive a week. Kells messengered a copy of something stamped and unnecessary. The only surprise was a Than's card, delivered by a man too polite to admit he'd been tipped. The card said, in a hand that had learned restraint late, "My mother liked a fight she could win. Thank you for choosing one she would have." It wasn't thanks. It was something better. The start of a man discovering he'd been wrong his entire adult life in a particular direction. When the house quieted, the day did what days do when they've finished misbehaving. Wolfe rang for beer. I had one of my own, and we sat like men who had paid the right bill. He let the first swallow adjust his mood and then said, "The world would be better if men understood the difference between demonstration and proof." "You had both," I said. "Paprika and paragraph." He inclined his head. One to attract attention, the other to fix it. The thief thought competence would dazzle. It is not competence that convinces, Archie. It is consistency. Kitchens, offices, wills, they require the same habit. Habit, I said, because I'd heard that word earlier in another mouth. Ethan's excuse. Habit is either a leash or a spine, he said. He used it as the first, Lydia as the second. He glanced toward the envelope that now held nothing and everything. And Miss Eleni, there is a variety of theft I will not report because it pays in character. She will not do it again. She will not have to. He let that sit. The orchids upstairs breathed whatever orchids breathe. Down in the kitchen, Fritz moved in that precise music that says dinner is a promise kept. The brown stone, which had been invaded and then corrected, eased back into itself. If houses could shrug, ours did. There was one last call, predictably late. Julian, voice rough with swallowed pride. He didn't say hello. You think you've humiliated me, he said. I think you've been introduced to cause and effect, I said. You think my grandmother wanted this? A knife rest deciding who moves money? The question was stupid and honest, the way questions get when a man runs out of bluff. I think your grandmother wanted to see who could carry a symbol without using it as a club, I said. Today you didn't. Another day you might. Start by keeping your appointments without sprinting. He swore softly. Tell Wolfe I'll do without him. I looked at the phone and imagined setting it on the spy's shelf and letting it learn alignment. He'll survive. He hung up before he had to hear me not wishing him luck. Wolfe finished his beer and set the glass down exactly where it wouldn't leave a ring. He looked at me, that half-lidded look that says he's done laboring and ready to deliver judgment. What did we learn? That houses keep better secrets than families, I said. That a spice jar moved is a manifesto. That you can turn a lawyer by denying him the lie he prefers. He said, and that a symbol is best when it lies still. Dinner. We ate. Fritz's stew was a lesson. Everything where it belonged, heat balanced against patience, flavor precise without showing off. Afterward, I took a walk past the kitchen and found the paprika exactly where we'd put it and the pencil on the side table uncapped. Because I'd used it, and forgetfulness is my brand of arrogance. I left it that way. A man has to let the universe have a flaw somewhere. Otherwise, the next trespasser won't have a field to play on, and you won't notice when he does. Back in the office, Wolfe had closed his eyes and tilted his head the millimeter that means truce, not sleep. I sat, listened to a city that had gone back to its agreed-upon noises, and flipped my notebook shut. The knife rest had gone home to a cabinet that would have a new lock by morning. Lydia had a title she would wear properly. Eleni had a lesson she'd earned the hard way. Rule had a bruise on her vanity. Kells had a memo that would use the word hereby too often. Julian had time to learn he didn't deserve what he wanted, yet. And Wolfe had his brownstone back to the precise shade of inviolate that lets a man like him think. You could call that an ending. Around here, we call it an appetite. The next morning decided to behave itself. That doesn't happen often in our line, but when a case ends on a rhythm that suits Wolfe, the city seems to get the memo. I did the ordinary things that make a house admit you live there. Checked the mail slot, straightened the stand by the phone, and verified that my pencil was still uncapped, just to reassure the fates we weren't getting above ourselves. Fritz fed us eggs that could have reconciled sworn enemies and let the coffee take charge of the rest. Wolfe read the Gazette as if it had personally offended him, which it always does, and didn't mention the Vardases until I'd finished the second cup and was ready to be reminded they exist. We didn't get the courtesy of silence for long. At 9:20, the doorbell gave a modest opinion. It was a messenger boy with a parcel wrapped in sober brown paper and string. He had the look boys get when a tip is unlikely. I gave him one anyway and brought the rectangle in like a mild threat. The return address said Vardis, in a script that had learned restraint the hard way. I put it on Wolfe's desk, and he looked at it the way he'd look at a foreign mushroom, interested but alert to mischief. I cut the string, lifted the lid, and found a photograph and a note. The photo showed a holiday table from some other winter. Sophia Vardis presiding with a face that could bless and bludgeon in the same breath. In the foreground, the knife rest did its small job, bearing a carving knife that reflected children's faces like commas. The note was from Lydia, 2 lines. "For your file, if you keep such things. We will keep the rest where it belongs." It wasn't thanks. It was bookkeeping, and the tone was right. I put the photograph in the drawer where I keep the records that remind me why we bother. At 10, the phone performed. Kells. He sounded like a man who had bitten into a lemon and found it clean. "Mr. Goodwin, please convey to Mr. Wolfe that the administrative transition has been recorded. Mrs. Vardis asked that I arrange a meeting with all interested parties next week to discuss disbursement timetables and audit schedules." She was pointed. "You'll live," I said. He cleared his throat. She requested less ceremony going forward. "She's learning to wield dull tools," I said. "It's a skill." Before he could construct a reply that involved "hereby," I let him go. Wolfe was listening. He usually is when it costs me dignity. He flicked 2 fingers. "Consistency," he said. "She will impose it. The family will complain. Then they will breathe easier without knowing why." "Until the next symbol comes along," I said. "Symbols do not come," he said. "People drag them." We had a quiet quarter hour that made me suspicious. Then the phone decided it had a theme. Rule, crisp as a dewless morning. "Tell Mr. Wolfe," she said, "that he can add this to his moral statistics. I recommended to my client he keep his hands out of family governance for a year. He won't. But I bill by the attempt. And Goodwin, yes, I did not move your paprika. You moved mine," I said. She breathed out what might be a laugh if laughter balanced books. "Touché?" A pause. "If you ever need an accountant who likes orchids, I'll send a man who won't." "We'll muddle through," I said, and set the receiver down before she could call it a draw. At 11, Saul came by without an appointment, which he's permitted in the same way the sun is permitted to rise. He took the chair by the window that fits him like a glove that's given up arguing and gave us the lace of his mourning. Julian had been seen attempting a reconciliation with an investor whose handshake had a Teflon coating. Calliope had been to a church office, left flowers, and a note that said, "For the noonday meal," which might have been theology or housekeeping. Athan had met a man in a dark car and come away looking less convinced the world owed him obedience. None of it was dramatic. That was the news. The family had returned to the slow maintenance of their own illusions without needing a locksmith. Saul ate a cookie because Fritz has an agenda, and the agenda is sugar. "You going to send them a bill with a sermon?" he asked. "Just a bill," I said. The sermon got delivered free. Wolfe made a noise you could translate as approval if you meant to stay employed. "Mr. Panzer," he said, "kindly keep an eye on the young man for a week. If he seeks a shortcut, we will allow him to take it, so long as it leads to a harmless cul-de-sac." Saul nodded. "If the road curves to crime, then we will shift from ethics to practicality," Wolfe said, and that was that. The orchids demanded him at noon. I typed up our notes with the care you use when you know the future will come back and ask what the past was thinking. Fritz brought a sandwich that had the rare gift of meaning every bite. When Wolfe came down at 2, the day had settled into the pattern it wants when a case has concluded. Paper, beer, and the occasional sigh disguised as Latin. We were almost safe. The doorbell rang again. This time it produced a woman with a hat that had decided gravity was a rumor. Calliope, scented like memory and insisting on the right to violate our air. She accepted the red leather chair without strain and permitted herself to smile at Wolfe the way parishioners smile at saints they suspect of vanity. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I have come to bring you a sin." "Leave it by the door," I said. "We store them in barrels." She tilted her head. "My nephew is not a villain," she said to Wolfe. "He is a boy who is not told what to do with his appetite." "Then he has a common disease," Wolfe said. "What is your sin?" "I enjoyed this," she said simply. Sophia enjoyed spectacle. I enjoyed order being imposed upon spectacle. I am vain enough to think she would have too. She set something on the desk. A small paper packet, thin as a letter. "This is from the island. Chios. The silversmith's grandson wrote to me years ago when Sophia visited. He asked for proof that we still kept the token. I never sent it. I kept his letter because I am a hoarder of other people's pasts. Perhaps it belongs with your photograph. Then, when the next generation decides to make a mess, they will remember that the object was a bridge before it became a club." She rose before we could decide whether to accept a sacrament from a layperson. Wolfe inclined his head. She floated out, leaving the scent of lilies and self-forgiveness. I added the packet to the drawer with the photograph. If there's one thing age teaches a house, it's that evidence of former sanity is worth the space. The phone tried one more time. Eleni. She was careful now, the way the newly brave often are. "I only wanted to say I'm going to law school," she blurted, and then stumbled. "Not because of this. Because of this too. Aunt Lydia said I could sit in on the meeting next week and take notes, and after that, we'll look at applications. And I don't know if I'll be any good, but I'd like to be good in a way that doesn't require sewing things into hems." "Try not to put that in your personal statement," I said. "But I like the direction." "Tell Mr. Wolfe, thank you," she said, and hung up before courage had to repeat itself. I relayed it. Wolfe didn't smile. He allowed his face to rest. "If she learns to revere dullness," he said, "she will do well." "Dullness is the family trade you've always respected," I said. "It is the only reliable solvent for vanity," he said. At 4, the door eased open the way doors do when guilt is on tiptoe. It was Mrs. Ahern, hatless, hands clean. She stood just inside the threshold, ready to retreat if we insisted on ceremony. Wolfe didn't. She came forward 2 steps and looked from him to me and then down at her own shoes, as if checking whether they'd brought dirt into holy places. "I worked for Mrs. Sophia 31 years, she said. "I don't stay for thieves. I stay for women who have to keep order around them." The pause wasn't long. If Miss Lydia becomes the kind of administrator who forgets that a house is a person, not a ledger, I will remind her. And if she forgets twice, I will leave. She nodded to us as if we'd been consulted and approved, and turned to go. At the doorway, she added, "The paprika is where it should be," and left with a small victory in her gait. We let the quiet settle on the room like dust where dust belongs. Wolfe rang for beer. When Fritz brought it, he put down, without being asked, a small dish of olives and a slice of lemon for the glass. He does that sometimes when a case has ended with more mending than cutting. He thinks it evens the balance. Wolfe took a sip, closed his eyes, and addressed the ceiling as if it were a jury that had finally found reason. "Archie, tell me what was stolen." "A piece of silver," I said, because I enjoy laying down the obvious where he can step over it. "No," he said, "that was borrowed. Other things were stolen. Time from a lawyer who will not miss it. A boy's illusions, which he will. A housekeeper's solitude, which she surrendered cheerfully. A niece's innocence, which she needed to lose. And, briefly, our house's tranquility." He opened his eyes. "The only theft that matters is of responsibility. When people use symbols to avoid it, the house groans." "It stopped," I said. "The groaning. For now," he said, "until the next family drags in a relic and demands a verdict." I let him have the last line for once. It was the right one. I put the photograph and the island letter in the drawer and closed it the way you close a chapter you might have to quote later. The sunlight eased down the wall, and the city remembered to put its noise back where it found it. I went to the kitchen and watched Fritz turn onions translucent with a kind of affection that doesn't need witnesses. When I came back, Wolfe had put the Gazette away and was looking at nothing with the kind of attention men pay only to the thing they can't fix. That's the moment in a Wolfe case I always like best, the breath after the argument when the house reclaims its shape. He sat there with the exact stillness he teaches nervous people to hate and said, almost to the air, "A token is a servant. When a family makes it king, it will rule them badly." "Add it to the bill," I said. He lifted a finger. "I did," he said, and let the finger fall. Dinner was lamb with rosemary that taught humility. Dessert was a tart that tasted like restraint done right. The last call came from no one and nowhere. Sometimes the city allows you that courtesy. I did a final circuit before bed, checked the latch, the lamps, and the line of the pencil on the side table. I capped it for Fritz's sake and left the paprika to stand watch. Upstairs, the orchids breathed whatever orchids breathe, and Wolfe's house settled into the shape it prefers, inviolate in form, compromised by the necessity of human beings, and satisfied for the time being that its inhabitants remember where things belong. The brownstone had absorbed more than its share of arguments that week, but by the time the last of the Vardis business was put to bed, it was back to its proper temperature, quiet, heavy, and faintly smug. I sat at my desk and filed the case in the drawer where good intentions, bad timing, and family sins make their permanent residence. Wolfe leaned back in his chair with his eyes closed, the orchids above us tended, the kitchen below humming with Fritz's comfort, and the knife rest now just another object with less drama than it had pretended to carry. The family had gone its ways. Lydia, with a spine she might not have suspected she owned, would run the trusts with a patience Sophia might even have approved. Eleni, with a secret ambition born of stitching silver into a hem, was learning that loyalty is better served by ink on a page than by tricks with keys. Athan had his disdain intact, but even disdain needs to bend under new weather, and he was beginning to. Calliope had found her sermon in the satisfaction of order, while Julian was left to wrestle with the discovery that appetite is not the same as competence. Rule had taken her bruised ego to whatever ledger would still have her, and Kells had learned to measure his schedules by the woman who now signed, not by the clock he once thought he set. It ended not with applause, but with equilibrium. That's how Wolfe prefers it. Families crave drama, but houses crave silence, and the brownstone had taken its silence back. The trespasses, the paprika, the pencil, the misaligned order, had been restored, and the house forgave with the same calm inevitability Fritz forgives burnt sauces, by cooking better the next time. I closed my notebook and looked at Wolfe. "So," I said, "all's well that ends." His eyes opened, slow, heavy-lidded. "Pfui, nothing ends. Families will drag tokens, relics, contracts, and egos into offices until the last cabbage rots. What ends is our obligation to endure them." He lifted his glass of beer, studied the foam, and sipped. "Miss Vardis will do well enough. Her niece will do better. The others, well, folly needs exercise too." He set the glass down exactly where it would leave no ring, and closed his eyes again. "The lesson, Archie, is that symbols are useful only when they stay in their places. When they are exalted, they corrupt. When they are stolen, they reveal. And when they are returned, they are merely what they always were. Ornaments." "Ornament or not," I said, "it kept us busy." "Appetite keeps us busy," he murmured. "Theirs, mine, yours. Theirs for power, mine for order, yours for narrative. Satisfy appetite, and the world behaves. Deny it, and you have clients. I let him drift into that half-sleep that is really digestion. Outside, the city went on making its racket, but inside the brownstone the order was restored. The air was ours again, and the case of the missing knife rest had become exactly what Wolfe said it would. An emblem, not of silver, but of folly, handled and put away. That's the conclusion, the kind Wolfe enjoys. Not triumph, not punishment. Just balance restored, appetite sated, and one more story to put in the drawer. And if you asked me whether I'd bet against another client ringing our bell with another relic tomorrow, I'd tell you, not for $1,000. But until then, we had silence. And in this house, silence is victory. 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 Is victory.